We're live.
Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Windsor and Ascot Development Appeals Panel. My name is Councillor Neil Knowles and it is the 7th of 6, isn't it? 6th of, yeah, one of the dates. 7th, yes, I'm wishing my life away. And I shall be chairing this meeting tonight. This meeting has been held in person and via Zoom and streamed live to the public on YouTube. And I remind all attendees that participation in the meeting indicates consent to the audio and video being streamed live and acknowledgement that after the meeting it will continue to be available in the public domain. Firstly, it would be useful if all the committee members and officers could introduce themselves so that the public watching and also in the room are aware of who is who in this meeting and the role they're undertaking. I've already introduced myself, so I'll move to my right.
Thank you, Councillor Mark Wilson, Vice Chair, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Julian T.Z, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Devon Davis, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Alison Carpenter, voting member of the panel.
Councillor David Buckley, voting member of the panel.
Councillor Genevieve Gosling, sub on this panel.
Councillor Sandra Luxton, a voting member of the panel.
Kimberley, Democratic Services Officer. I'll be clerking this meeting.
James Overall, Principal Planning Officer.
Nathaniel Sonia Thomas, Principal Planning Officer.
Tom Hughes, Senior Planning Officer.
And Adrian Waits, Assistant Director of Planning.
And we also have Helena Stevenson online as our legal officer this evening.
Hello, Helena. Helena's there to offer advice and to jump in should we go daft in the room. So that the public are aware, both councillors who have not specifically asked to introduce themselves might also be attending this meeting virtually via Zoom, which I don't think we've got anybody at the moment. But anyone that may show up who's an elected councillor is only here in an observing capacity, and there's no right for councillors who are not members of the committee or have not formally registered to speak in advance to play an active role in the meeting this evening. The attendance of any councillors in this capacity shall be reflected via the member attendance records once the meeting has concluded. I request that meeting participants do not speak unless I specifically invite you to do so. Once I've invited you to speak, before you do so, please state your name and the capacity in which you are speaking, if appropriate. Not so for the panel members, obviously for members of the public. If any individual attempts to disrupt the meeting, I'm able to use my powers in the Constitution to adjourn the meeting or have the individual removed. We now have the agenda items which we follow. Agenda item 1, apologies for absent. Kim.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Sharp, who is being substituted by Councillor Gosling this evening, as well as apologies from Councillor Da Costa.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest, which is agenda item 2? Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to declare an interest as on the item 6, which is the Horton Brook Quarry. I am the parish council member of Horton and a ward councillor for the ward. But I come to this meeting with an open mind.
Thank you. Councillor Gosling.
Yes, I'd like to make a declaration of interest because I know the owners of the Milcote and Nook, which is the first item on the agenda.
And any more conflicts of interest, or declarations, should I say, rather than a conflict of interest, declarations of interest? Not at all. Next item, agenda item 3, is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of October 2024, which have been published and set out. Do we all agree that it's a true record of the meeting? In that case, I shall sign it for Democratic Services. There we go. Next, we then move on to the main bulk of the meeting, which we will stay in with the agenda as published. No need to change around this evening. Item number 4 is application 23/00921, a full application, Milcote and the Nook at Milcote Kings Ride, Ascot, proposal for apartments with basement parking, refuse store and landscaping with the following the demolition of the existing buildings. Can we have the presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Prior to starting the presentation, I would like to draw your attention to the panel update. Hopefully, it is self-explanatory, but essentially the point to reiterate is that Town and Country Planning Act 1990 does not require councils to accept additional or amended documents. I'll now start the presentation. This is a full planning application for the redevelopment of the site to provide 10 apartments. It is important to note that the application site comprises land falling under two authorities, Bracknell Forest Council and RBWM. Bracknell Forest Council have already decided their application under delegated authority, which was refused on 4 grounds. The first being unacceptable impact on the openness of the greenbelt, and the following 3 are all to do with the lack of a legal obligation to secure various things such as mitigation measures for the harm arising to the Thames Basin Heath SPA, to failing to secure contributions towards biodiversity, net gain, open space and community facilities, and also failing to secure affordable housing. This slide shows the site location plan. The site boundary can be clearly identified by the red line. As noted, the application site falls under the jurisdiction of both Bracknell Forest and RBWM. Bracknell Forest is shown in green, whilst RBWM is shown in blue. This slide shows an aerial image of the application site, which lies southwest of Ascot Racecourse. In this slide, I have overlaid the site location plan on an aerial image to show the area falling within the jurisdiction of RBWM. This image shows the borough boundary, which is depicted by the purple line, and this version of the image shows the constraints local to the application site. The application site lies within the Metropolitan Greenbelt and is bordered to the north by ancient woodland. This slide shows the site layout plan. The blue outlines show existing buildings which are proposed to be demolished. The straight dotted red line shows the borough boundary, and the dotted red circles show trees to be removed. This slide shows the layout again, but with enhanced graphics. As the lines are a bit hard to see through on this one, I've included the previous image. The next few slides will run through the floor plans and elevations of existing structures. As you have seen from the previous site layout plans, the proposal seeks to demolish the existing structures, which predominantly lie within the jurisdiction of RBWM. However, the proposed apartment block is to be erected solely within the jurisdiction of Bracknell Forest. This slide shows the existing floor plans of the main house, and this slide shows the existing elevations of the main house. This one shows the existing elevations of the cottage on site, and this shows the existing elevations of the swimming pool. This shows the elevations of the existing stables, and this the existing garage, and this one the existing pump house. Whilst the proposed apartment block lies within Bracknell Forest, the next slides show the floor plans and elevations of the proposed building. This one showing the basement where the car park, cycle storage and other storerooms are to be located. This plan shows the ground floor of the proposed apartment block. This one the first floor, that the second, and that one the roof. Moving on to elevations, this shows the northeast elevation, this the southwest elevation, southeast elevation, and northwest elevation. The basement is to be accessed via a vehicular ramp as depicted in these plans. To understand the wider context, this image shows the existing street scene as seen from King's Ride, and this shows the street scene as proposed. To give some understanding to the proposal's impact on trees, this slide shows the root protection areas plan. The coloured red circles are not those proposed for removal, but instead depict 80% no-dig surface exclusion zones. The trees proposed for removal are indicated by the dotted red circles. Finally, moving on to site visit photos, I'll flick through these without any discussion. Please note, I've provided arrows over the top of the existing site plan to indicate the direction and location each photograph was taken from. This is also useful in noting which jurisdiction each photo covers. To wrap this up, the application is recommended for refusal on 4 grounds. The first being failure to deliver high quality development through reason of harm to trees by way of removal of or detrimental impact upon significant trees within the development site and unnecessary pressures on the health and longevity of neighbouring trees, including those covered by the ancient woodland designation. The second being insufficient information to demonstrate that the proposals would achieve a measurable biodiversity net gain. The third being insufficient information, including but not limited to bat emergence surveys as identified a necessity within the submitted preliminary ecological appraisal. And a fourth being insufficient information to demonstrate that the proposed access would be adequate to accommodate the significant increase in intensification and that it would not pose a significant risk to highway safety. Just going back to the update report, whilst the applicant contends that information has been submitted to possibly overcome the reasons for refusal regarding insufficient information, the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990 does not require councils to accept additional or amended documents. As a cross-boundary application, RBWM have not taken a fee for this application, which means no funds have been received to process the application or entertain additional work. Officers considered that the information submitted has been submitted unsolicited, the information to be unsolicited, and therefore none of the additional plans information have been subject to any consultation within our borough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Overall. If you'd like to, we did have a speaker, Lawrence Moore, who's now withdrawn, I believe.
Yes.
So there are no speakers at all on this subject. I'll open the floor to debate. If anybody has, Councillor Davies.
Well, it seems like, at least from the RBWM side of it, it may well be workable, but there are 3 technical reasons why it isn't, much related to missing information, and also one more physical reason of the removal of trees in ancient woodland. Looking at plans and see like maybe we could work something out, but as it isn't the case. I'm not sure there's really that much to discuss. It's missing 3 pieces of technical information, and it's going to destroy, get rid of trees which isn't allowed. That's 4 nails in the coffin as far as I can tell. I'll open up to the floor for anyone else in case someone can change their mind.
Any other points, Councillor Tizzy? You were twitching.
I was twitching, but since you did, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I think that. I mean, I was prepared to sort of listen to. It's a rather complicated application, isn't it? Because of the boundary change and because of the fact that we have the existing buildings are predominantly within RBWM, and whereas the proposed buildings would be, I think, exclusively in Bracknell Forest Council. Can I just ask officers just for clarification? I saw a question about different reasons for refusal, as it were. Now, I presume one of the reasons that I understand that Bracknell Forest refused was on grounds of the harm to greenbelt. I presume that applies to them because they are getting the housing, whereas it may not apply to us, and that would be a reason. Can I just clarify that I've understood that correctly? Thank you.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So, as you say, it's a cross-boundary application, but each authority has to assess the elements that lie within their jurisdiction. So it would be unreasonable for us to put a greenbelt reason for refusal on here because we don't actually have any part of the development other than the access road. If we felt the access road maybe created some sort of harm to the openness of the greenbelt or anything, then it might be reasonable, but in this case, we don't believe it does.
Any more? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I guess just sort of testing the premise of this, obviously I completely recognise the reasons for refusal. Is there obviously this is kind of creating more housing than there was, but that housing is in Bracknell and not RBWM. Is there any kind of collective view that we can take that this is, in a sense of creating housing, this is beneficial?
Mr. Wayne.
I mean, I think in any application we deal with, we consider the fact that there is a general housing crisis across the country, and the provision of housing is a planning benefit. So that would be factored into any recommendation officers made, either here or I'm sure at Bracknell as well. The issue then comes down to balancing the benefits of that housing against the harms. So I suppose, in paper terms, we work in this kind of hard boundary issue. The housing units on the site would contribute to Bracknell's housing needs on paper, not ours, but they would, of course, provide homes that people who want to live in or close to the borough would be just as likely to buy as someone from Bracknell. So there is a benefit there. The difference then is the planning balance. So does that benefit in terms of the provision of housing outweigh the planning harms that we've identified and talked about? And I suppose that's where the judgment lies. That's a judgment for you as members to reach. I suppose technically we haven't got a greenbelt refusal reason on, because as James says, the built form's in Bracknell, and we just didn't want to really duplicate things unnecessarily. But it is a greenbelt site, so for it to be acceptable, the benefit of the development would have to outweigh all of the combined harms, both by way of principle and by way of the other harms. So if it is refused and it does go to appeal, the appeal inspector will actually have to deal with the whole lot and have a much easier job than either of the councils has, because they just get to determine the site as one.
So that is a key point. If it did go to appeal, it'd be viewed as one application, not with the boundary involved in the middle. So, Councillor Beckley.
Yes, if I can be kind enough to ask the officer to go back to the outline of the trees and where the dotted lines were in removal of trees and significant harm would be shown. Yeah, that's one, yeah. And just to get some clarification, if we could get some sort of idea on that, because it's quite busy and obviously flicking through the presentation, if we could just get a bit more detail on there and explain a bit more what's happening.
That one does it a bit better.
Okay, fine, yeah. Okay, if you could, please.
So you're really looking at the trees, yes? Yeah, so towards the north, so you can see the application outline in red. To the north of that is designated ancient woodland. I think there is, from the tree officer's comments, that there is evidence to suggest that the ancient woodland did sprawl a bit beyond what is the actual definitive boundary as on a constraints plan. The red dotted outlines, as I say, this is less busy than the other map, the other plan, but the dotted red outlines are those to be removed. And yes, the built form is going to be further away than the existing structures, but as set out in the report within paragraphs. I think it was early on in the report. I can just find it very quickly. It was
one, I think.
Essentially officers disagreed on the. If you give me 1 second, I'll just find it. Okay, so the tree officer was consulted on the application and provided comments, and they set out that they had significant concerns with the proposal, noting that the positioning of the proposed development in relation to the existing ancient woodland to the north, it had been noted from historical mapping that the ancient woodland would have covered the application site itself, but has been eroded over time to the point where its southern boundary now forms the northern boundary of the application site. The tree officer states that the 15-metre buffer zone is required between any built form and the edge of the ancient woodland in order to ensure its long-term survival. Little mention of the ancient woodland had been provided in the submitted arboricultural reports, and therefore it is considered that insufficient information has been submitted in order for the LPA to fully assess the potential impacts of the proposal upon the trees that are said to be retained. and furthermore, insufficient details have been provided in relation to the access and the proposed track. And so it is unclear how these two aspects of the scheme would potentially harm the root protection areas and or the crowns of any existing trees on site, including those located along the northern boundary.
Councillor Luxon.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I would agree with councillor and go, second is, I've got to lose
I didn't propose anything. so
Oh, you didn't
can-
propose
Yeah,
anything?
go ahead.
I thought you were proposing the beginning, let me go ahead and listen to officer's recommendation.
I never made a formal declaration.
Okay, fine. Well, I'm happy to make it.
Yeah. Okay, so.
Yeah,
So you wish to propose that we accept
Officer's
the officer's
recommendation.
recommendation?
Yeah.
Do we have a seconder for that?
Go on, mate, I'll second.
Councillor Carpenter, beat you by a whisker then. Okay, are you happy to? second?
Yeah, I'm happy to second it. I was going to propose it anyway, because, obviously, all the reasons that councillor Davies said, really, insufficient information and the detrimental effect on the trees. I'm just wondering why it even came to panel with the insufficient information, though, because it was unlikely to be accepted, I think, right? So why did it even get this far?
I think really it's because it's piggybacked on the previous application, isn't it?
Okay.
So-
Okay.
Well, I mean, if I just come in briefly, so there are what are called national validation requirements and local validation requirements. So if we have an application that has all the information in it that's required to validate it, we've got a duty to register it and consider it. It doesn't necessarily always mean that we have all of the information with the application that we actually need to judge it against policies, but we have everything that is needed to make a valid submission.
Thank you. Is anybody, anything else, right? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, just one question. Thank you, Chair. And actually pausing on the picture that you've got up on the screen at the moment, I guess I know that the site may not be the best well cared for. Is there anything in terms of this application where we could where that could be influenced at all, or is that a planning matter, or is that something
I
else?
think really it's a separate matter, isn't it, unfortunately? So-
Yes, I mean, it's not a matter beyond the fact that obviously if you granted planning permission tonight, then the site would change. It wouldn't be a matter for the panel tonight. We could separately ask the enforcement team to look at if there were any planning issues around what's on the site at the moment, or whether it is so detrimental as to cause a problem. But that would be a separate matter we would have to look at rather than a matter for tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Anybody else to add anything? We have a motion proposed by Councillor Luxton to approve the officer's recommendations to reject the application, seconded by Councillor Carpenter. Can we have the name vote if we're ready, please?
Yes, of course. As you said, we have a motion proposed by Councillor Luxton and seconded by Councillor Carpenter to refuse planning permission for the reasons listed in the report and in line with officer recommendation. I will now go to a named vote. Councillor Buckley.
Or
Councillor Carpenter.
4.
Councillor Davies.
4.
Councillor Gosling.
I can't vote.
You can, but you can also abstain.
Okay, I'll abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Knowles.
Or
Councillor Luxton.
4.
Councillor Teasy.
4.
Councillor Wilson.
4.
So that's 7-4, 1 abstention. The motion carries.
so that is a refusal in line with officer recommendations. Thank you very much, Mr. Everall. Agenda item 5 now is 23/02311, a full application for the land at Silwood Park, London Road, Sunninghill in Ascot. Can I ask for the presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is a full planning application which seeks a net gain of 35 residential units. The change of use and refurbishment of Silwood Manor would provide 21 apartments, whereas 8 new dwellings and 6 apartments are proposed within the grounds of Silwood Park following the demolition of existing buildings. Additionally, the proposal seeks permission to extend Silwood Lodge, an existing residential unit within the grounds of Silwood Park. This slide shows the site location plan. The site boundary can be clearly identified by the red line. This slide shows an aerial image of the application site, which lies northeast of Sunninghill. This image shows the constraints local to the application site. The application site lies within the Metropolitan Greenbelt, and a number of blanket TPOs cover the site. Silwood Manor itself is Grade 2 listed. This slide shows where the proposed site layout plan. I have used this plan on future slides to indicate where within the site I'm referring. The next few slides will run through floor plans and elevations. Each existing plan is followed by its respective proposed plan to help with understanding the transition. This slide shows the existing basement of Silwood Manor, and this slide shows the proposed basement of Silwood Manor. Only one residential unit is to be proposed within the basement as depicted by the red colour. Green is used to show areas for shared services and private storage, whereas yellow shows communal circulation. This slide shows the existing ground floor of Silwood Manor, and this shows the proposed ground floor. Green on this plan shows an individual plot, whilst yellow remains consistent with the basement plan depicting communal circulation. This slide shows the existing first floor of Silwood Manor, and this slide shows the proposed first floor of Silwood Manor. This slide shows the existing second floor of Silwood Manor, and this slide shows the proposed second floor. This slide shows the existing roof plan of the Silwood Manor, and this shows the proposed roof plan. Moving on to elevations, this slide shows 2 existing elevations of Silwood Manor, and this slide shows the same elevations as proposed. This slide shows a further 7 elevations of Silwood Manor as existing, and this slide shows the same elevations as proposed. This slide shows the existing courtyard elevations, and this slide shows the proposed courtyard elevations. This slide shows the proposed floor plan and elevations of the cycle store, which serves the 21 apartments proposed within Silwood Manor. And this slide shows the proposed floor plan and elevations of the bin store, serving the same 21 apartments. Plot 26 relates to Silwood Lodge, which is subject to a proposed extension. This slide shows existing floor plans, and this slide shows the proposed floor plans. This slide shows the existing elevations of Silwood Lodge, and this slide shows the proposed elevations. Prior to going through the proposed development within the grounds of Silwood Park, I want to show you the demolition plan. The red areas depict existing buildings which are proposed to be demolished. This slide shows the proposed floor plans for plots 22 to 25, which form a terrace of 4 dwellings. This slide shows the proposed elevations for plots 22 to 25. And this slide shows the proposed elevations overlaid against the existing structures that they replace. This slide shows the proposed bin and cycle store, which will serve plots 22 to 25. This slide shows the proposed floor plan and elevations for plot 27. And this slide shows the proposed elevations overlaid against the existing structure that it replaces. This slide shows the proposed floor plans and elevations for plots 28 and 29, which form a pair of semi-detached dwellings. And this slide shows the proposed elevations overlaid against the existing structures that they replace. Building J is proposed for conversion to provide cycle and bin storage for the plots 28 and 29. This slide shows the existing floor plans and elevations for the building. And this slide shows the proposed floor plan and elevations of Building J. Moving closer to Silwood Manor, this slide shows the proposed floor plans and elevations of plot 30. And this slide shows the proposed elevations overlaid against the existing structure that it replaces. This slide shows the proposed floor plan and elevations for the proposed cycle stores that serve plots 27 and 30. This slide shows the proposed floor plans for plots 31 to 36, which form an apartment block of 6 dwellings. And this slide shows the proposed elevations for plots 31 to 36. This slide shows the proposed elevations overlaid against the existing structure that they replace. And this slide shows the proposed bin and cycle store for which serve plots 31 to 36. Moving on to site visit photos, please note that I've provided arrows over the top of the existing site plan to indicate the direction and location each photograph was taken from. This photo shows the north elevation of Silwood Manor, seen from Silwood Bottom. In the foreground, the ha-ha can be seen. This photo shows the north view northwards from Silwood Manor over Silwood Bottom. And this photo shows the north elevation of Silwood Manor. The single-storey element is the orangery. This photo shows the south elevation of Silwood Manor, including the orangery. The lily pond can be seen in the foreground. This photo shows the east elevation of the Garden Wood South Annex, which is the building to be replaced by plots 31 to 36. The clock tower in the foreground is part of the stables complex. This photo shows a clearer view of the clock tower belonging to the stables complex. And this photo shows a clearer view of the Garden Wood South Annex. This photo shows the south elevation of Silwood Manor with the Garden Wood South Annex on the right-hand side. This arch is the eastern entrance to the stables. And this photo shows the Visitors Lodge Hall, which is to be replaced by plot 30. And this photo shows it again, but looking down the road towards Silwood Manor. This photo looks eastward into a cluster of outbuildings concealed among trees. I've labelled building J, as this is the one proposed to be converted into cycle and bin store for plots 28 and 29. The others are to be demolished and replaced by plots 28 and 29. This photo shows the same cluster, but looking westwards instead. Again, building J is labelled. This photo shows building D, which is to be demolished and replaced with plot 27. The photo looks at it from the northeastwards, looks northeastwards across an overgrown paved area. Again, this photo shows building D, but looking northwards from a lane that runs south. This photo shows Silwood Lodge, which is the existing residential property sought to be extended. This photo looks along the northern access, serving the two existing tractor sheds labelled as buildings A and B, which are to be replaced by plots 22 to 25. And this photo looks along the southern access, serving the same two tractor sheds. This photo shows the tractor shed known as building B, and this photo shows the tractor shed known as building A. To wrap this up, the application is recommended for approval, subject to satisfactory completion of a Section 106 legal agreement to secure a contribution to the Council's carbon offset fund totalling £55,565, which is split as £15,525 for building emissions and £40,040 for lifestyle. 0.65 hectares of sangland at Frost Folly, Moss End Farm. The strategic access management and monitoring contributions, otherwise known as SAM, amounting to £21,973.13, as well as an affordable housing contribution amounting to £75,507. The recommendation is also subject to the conditions noted within section 14 of the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Overall. We have a speaker for the applicants this evening, Matthew Parry from Beechcraft Developments Limited. If I can invite you to take the chair and as registered speaker. And when you're ready to speak, press the big red button, the light will come on. You've got 3 minutes to address the panel, and Kim will give you a 1 minute warning, 1 minute to go warning. Okay, so please do crack on.
Thank you, Chair. So by means of a brief introduction, Beechcraft Developments is a well-established developer of specialist housing, been operating for over 40 years. And over this time, we have developed a well-proven track record in sensitively converting and refurbishing historic buildings all across the country to deliver high-quality new homes to meet local needs. The scheme that you've seen before you tonight has been the product of nearly 3 years' worth discussion and engagement with council officers across 2 different planning applications to try to achieve a development that delivers important new housing on a sustainable site in a way that sensitively conserves the Grade 2 listed Silwood Manor and its surrounding Silwood Park grounds. As officers have already noted, Silwood Manor and its surrounding ancillary buildings were once part of the wider Imperial College London Silwood Park campus, but they've stood empty now since 2009 when they became surplus to the college's requirements. Silwood Manor itself is a grand Gothic revival Victorian building that's costly to maintain and does not lend itself to modern teaching. Whilst the building is still in generally good condition, it's beginning to suffer from a lack of upkeep that over time will start to harm its special interest. The Manor House and its grounds were subject to extensive marketing in the late 2010s by Imperial College London, and there was no viable interest expressed in the site for anything other than residential development, given the nature of the building and the costs associated with converting and maintaining it. As a site owner's preferred developer, Beechcroft Developments has taken the opportunity to work from the outset with conservation officers at the council to formulate a scheme for its conversion to apartments that preserves its special architectural interest as far as possible while securing the future of the building. As the planning officer has stated in his report, proposals include relatively limited alterations to the exterior of the building, with only minor internal alterations involving works that are limited to only those that are strictly necessary. The proposals, therefore, in our view, strike the right balance between undertaking some modest alterations to the building to ensure it's fit for residential use, while achieving a viable use for the building that safeguards its future. And we hope members agree with us and officers on that. Turning to the wider site, the proposals retain all trees of significance within the site and include new planting proposals that would add to the landscape character of Silwood Park. This in turn helps development to deliver a substantial net gain towards biodiversity, as noted in the committee report. Car parking and hard servicing have been minimised to ensure the landscape character of Silwood Park is preserved. So overall, we're confident the proposals will enhance the setting of Silwood Manor and the character of Silwood Park as a whole. In other respects, the site's location within the Greenbelt has been recognised from the outset, and as officers have stated, the scheme proposes a combination of the reuse of existing buildings and replacement buildings that are not materially larger than the existing structures they replace. And so the proposals are not inappropriate in the Greenbelt. So in summary, there have been no statutory consultative objections outstanding left to the proposals.
That's 3 minutes.
And we hope members will agree with officers' recommendation to approve. Thank you.
Nicely sped, Red, but thank you very much indeed. Well, there we have the views and the information, and I'd just like to open up to the panel members to discuss. Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I've just got one question really, and that's around the affordable housing. I understand that there's a vacant building credit, and so they don't have to provide affordable housing, but there's a financial amount of 75,507 that's going to be paid instead. Could you just explain a little bit about that? Because obviously, you know, it's important that new developments have as much affordable housing as possible. Thank you.
Yes, so vacant building credit is a process that can be used to substitute vacant floor space for proposed floor space at the cost of reducing affordable housing. And so in this case, the amount of floor space that was proposed is essentially an uplift of 125.91 square meters. The vacant floor space that is exists on site, which is to be demolished, is 5,315.9 square meters, and the proposed totals 5,441.81 square meters. That's an uplift of 2.37%. And whilst the scheme would normally require 10.5 units of affordable housing, the percentage of that, it means that 97.686% of it is vacant building credit to be deducted off of that. So essentially you're left with 0.243 units of affordable homes, which obviously can't be provided on site as an actual unit. And so we've sought a commuted sum for the equivalent of that 0.243 units, which equates to £75,507.
I think, yeah, very in-depth. I think the basic principle, isn't it? It's a vacant building, so part of that vacant space counts, offsets the affordable housing that they would have to provide normally. Very, very simple thing. And it is vacant. It's been empty for quite a long time, hasn't it? For since 2010 at least, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, a considerably long time. Yes.
And that is a a thing, isn't it? It's empty. It's not been in use. Can I, if anybody brings up, because it's quite a long report, this one, if anybody brings up anything in the report, can they just tell us what paragraph it is? Because it sort of leads your eye to it. Anybody else? Councillor Luxton.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions on this one, actually. Number one is, we have had some objections from two groups. One is the Society of Protection of Ascot, and the other one is from the neighbourhood plan. So they have got a couple of things that they have said they do not comply with the local borough plan policy. And I wonder how if those have been addressed by the officers. And can I continue the next? Yeah, and the next one is that particular development has a bit of an issue with that traffic jam, the crossroad problems there. And it's going to be quite tight. I just wondered if we are minded in any way to go forward with this. Is it possible to ask the developer if he would be able to do some sort of calming measures over there for traffic? Because that isn't going to be an issue even during Ascot week. And also the other thing, another condition for them was to a transport plan, because it is during working hours, traffic over there gets jammed, we have accidents over there. So if there is any possibility, if the traffic is moving in and out from the lorries and all that, if the planning permission was given, a condition should be put on that.
Okay, we've
Those are
got
my 3 points.
two questions there. We'll proceed with those. First question, first answer, please.
Yes, so in relation to the objections received from the Society for Protection of Ascot in Environment and Ascot, Sunningdale and Sunninghill Neighbourhood Plan Delivery Group, essentially their objections were more along the lines of concerns regarding the affordable housing. I believe that was just due to maybe a misunderstanding of the vacant building credit, which I addressed earlier. Yeah, it's a net gain of 35 units, which you'd expect affordable homes to be either provided or a contribution of a considerable degree. But because of the vacant building credit and the 97% of the floor space being reused from the vacant buildings, that has been reduced substantially. So for those reasons, really, the objections and concerns in regards to affordable housing, we believe are to not be really valid concerns for those reasons. Moving on to the highways concerns. So the existing use class of the site is class F1, which is learning and non-residential institutions. So whilst the site itself is vacant, it could be reinstated under that class F1. And if it was to be reused as class F1 and to continue with its existing use, that could lead to 380 two-way traffic per day, whereas the proposed development with a net gain of 35 residential units is really only going to be 40 two-way traffic a day. So it's considerably lower than what the site is capable of doing, although obviously the site is vacant, so it's minimal at the moment. Also, it's worth noting that our highways officers have assessed the existing access which is to be retained into the site, and they feel that it's capable of hosting the traffic that would be generated by the dwellings that are proposed.
Thank you.
I think comprehensive answer there. I think any more questions? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions to officers. Can I ask what the change in the footprint is in terms of the green belt? It looks very small. It seems to be pretty much building on existing footprints, but just if there's a sort of a number to that. And also, I know that on the grade 2 building, it's assessed as less than substantial harm. And I'm just interested to understand a bit more about that, because it almost seems like it's not really changing that much. And just understand if that's where that is in the scale. And I hear the applicant's points about it being a sort of, like, I guess, starting to potentially decay, and obviously this would help preserve. Just understand where that is in terms of like a listing Thank you.
Mr. Overall.
Yes, I'm going to come to that. I just want to find the appropriate paragraph. If you could give me 2 minutes, please. I'm not sure whether or not I have the exact footprint measurements for what's being demolished and what's being replaced, but it comes down to this vacant building credit answer. Really, that's where the numerical answer is in this, and that is that it's essentially an uplift of 125.91 square meters. So existing on site in terms of what is to be demolished is the 5,315.9 square meters, and what's to be erected in its place is 5,441.81 square meters. Whilst that isn't footprint, that is actually gross internal area. Hopefully that sort of gives an idea as to what's happening on site. Going on to the heritage element of this, paragraphs 10.51 to 10.57 of the report, they set out the public benefits that we've identified. So the application site has been vacant since 2009, that's 15 years, and officers consider that the revitalisation of the site would secure its optimum viable use. And that's given considerable weight towards the public benefit. With the revitalisation of the site and the proposed active use, it's considered that the heritage asset would be maintained by future occupiers or the management company, and therefore that's also given significant weight. Additionally, the delivery of 35 high-quality homes is considered to be a public benefit, which officers award significant weight. And obviously the introduction of new dwellings would provide an increase in local spending, which benefits the economy, and that's afforded moderate weight towards the wider public benefit. And also, lastly, that the scheme seeks to provide an approximate 1,000% increase in biodiversity on site, which officers award significant weight as a public benefit as well. Amounting all those together, because they shouldn't be read individually, it should all be read cumulatively, we feel that any heritage harm has been outweighed due to those public benefits.
Sorry, thank you. Would you mind explaining what the heritage harm is? Because that's not obvious from the report. Sorry, it might be a theoretical point about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try and answer this, because the issue with some of the definitions we have in planning policy terms, particularly in heritage, is that they don't necessarily mean what the common English interpretation would be, and they can be quite wide ranging. So if I use the expression less than substantial harm, it can accommodate quite a broad church of considerations, because anything that has a noticeable impact on the asset at all can be considered less than substantial harm. So any change that you can notice can fall into the category of less than substantial harm. But for it to fall into that category and not the one above, it has to not have a noticeable impact on our ability to appreciate the significance of the building. So it doesn't fundamentally impact on the things that were of significance to why it was listed. And obviously that can be quite a range of things, and there can be a vast degree of different impacts within that between proposals. But the key fundamental thing is it doesn't impact on our ability to appreciate the significance of the building or why it's listed. And that's why it's that category, not a higher level of harm.
Councillor Tishy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got a couple of questions, but let's start with those first and then sort of points generally. So looking at the objections that have come from the local parish council and also SPAE, the one it's interesting. SPAE seemed to be more against it, but actually the parish council seemed to be. It was mainly about the blocks 31 to 36. So can I just ask about that plot 31 to 36? I think when we went through those slides and saying here's the existing block to be demolished and here's what to me it looked very similar and actually to my sort of layman's eye it looked as if actually it was relatively sensitive, but I just wonder if you could just run that by us again. Second question actually is about, we talked about the buildings a lot. Oh yes, thank you. Which is this, so what's the current and what's the now?
So the red outline is quite difficult to make out actually on there, but there is a red outline. If I trace it with my mouse, it sort of does that.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And then it's also on this one here. But originally this came in with a different roof form. So this is an amended plan, and I don't believe whilst a reconsultation was done, I don't believe we've had amended comments on that. So it might be that
that explains it, right? Okay, so that's that one. Okay. The second thing was actually, and I did have a look. We talked about the buildings, but I remember this is some while ago going to a course here, and it was at the time utterly beautiful. Not just the manor house, but the manor grounds as well. You talk about the ha-ha, for example, and I learned what that is, and you know, why it's called a ha-ha, which is very, very good because you know you fall off the end and you go ha-ha, if you're unkind. I saw some comments from Berkshire Gardens Trust, which was actually quite useful. So it's one of the it's in the broad pack, and actually at the end of it they say that overall they think that they've got no objection to the proposed development. But they do talk about the designed landscape. They say 1790 survivals, 1790 Repton Design Valley landscape. Do you know how? I mean, it's saying it's been retained. That they sort of talk about the ha-ha, but they're saying that it's about the view of it would be slightly damaged by the parking, but then they didn't think that was overly. Do you have any comments on that? Any to your understanding? Sorry. About the landscape. So the question is about the landscape. How much of the landscape is being retained?
In terms of the landscape, as you say, really there's going to be a bit of hard standing going towards some of the proposed units. If you can see in the bottom left, for instance, where the terrace of 4 is for plots 22 to 25, it's got a driveway with some parking spaces. It's a bit of that really around the site. But to be honest with you, it's such a large site, and the majority of the landscape is going to be retained as existing, and ultimately the demolition of the existing outbuildings, which are in pretty poor condition, as you could probably see during the site visit photographs. In my personal opinion, I would say it's probably being tidied up due to the fact that they're being replaced by buildings of a higher quality.
Okay. So the only point I was going to make was that let's just throw it out there. I have to say that this is a beautiful landscape, and I think that it sounds as though this has been really well thought out. There's the officers and the applicant have worked over 3 years apparently to try to get something that is sensitive, and it does appear that this, I was worried greenbelt was my main concern, but actually I'm satisfied on balance that actually it does appear to be that it is, we're talking minor. The manor house, it seems, is the same. Certainly externally it is substantially materially the same. It looks as though actually I think that there is overall probably a benefit to having this design, to having this not vacant, as it were, as opposed to being vacant. And I have no idea. Oh, by the way, I think my course was before Imperial. It was actually owned by the UK government. I think it was owned by the Home Office. So this was even before Imperial College. That must have been a long time ago. Anyway, I would, on that basis, having looked at an enormous amount, I would propose that we go with officer recommendations and approve this application.
Thank you, Councillor Chizzy. Do we have a seconder at the moment for this? Councillor Devon Davis? Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Buckley?
I'd like to raise the point of traffic and public transport on this application. I'm understanding that there's only one public transport facility to this site, which is a number 1 bus, white bus, which visits the site very infrequently. And under the application, the officer's summary, point 10.124, where it states paragraph 116 of the MPPF sets out that development proposal should give priority first to pedestrian and cycle movements, and second, insofar as possible, to facilitating high quality public transport. Policy IF2 of the Borough Local Plan sets out that new development should provide safe, convenient and sustainable modes of transport. I just wondered how officers consider this in the application and vary this against the facility. There is no public transport or reliable public transport going to the site. And I'm thinking more of this being a sort of discrimination against people who are obviously unable to drive, cycle or walk to the site.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Yeah, as you quoted paragraph 116 in the MPPF, it says the first priority should be given to pedestrian cycle movements. So every dwelling on site has been afforded cycle storage facilities, and that meets the policy IF2 of the Borough Local Plan, which sets out that new development should provide convenient and sustainable modes of transport. So cycles are the primary sustainable mode of transport that we seek within the borough. And then, as you say, paragraph 116 of the MPPF then goes on, secondly, insofar as possible, to facilitate high quality public transport. In this instance, it's really outside of the development itself, and therefore not really that possible. And if still money could be spent on it, but that sort of lies outside of the application in how it gets spent, and that's really for the SIL team within the council to determine.
Thank you, Mr. Revel. Any more? We have a proposal. Sorry, Councillor Luxon, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question actually for the applicant. You mentioned something about a community hall being there before. Is it going to be there again? Because they used to we gave them license for alcohol license a couple of years ago, and there used to be a community hall, but then we were not allowed to use it. So I'm not sure. Do we still have that there? And I also want to definitely address the transport plan when all this is happening. If we are minded to whatever happens, that should be included as a condition, please. It's a very busy time for our traffic, people going to work and all the 4 junctions. So that has to be addressed, please. Thank you.
Address that, Mr. Revel or Mr. Waite? I don't know who wishes to jump in.
If I come in, so I mean the community hall. If you look at paragraphs 10.60 of the committee report onwards, there was some community use on the site, but that's addressed there. So it's obviously not there. There is a loss of it, but the loss of that use, which hasn't been there in any event for a substantial period of time, we as officers feel is outweighed by the benefits of the scheme. In terms of the highways impact point, from a determination of the planning application point of view, I would have to come back to whether it's a question about a a planning obligation or a condition. There are relevant legal tests that we have to apply to both. They're fairly similar. There's 3 for a planning obligation, there's more for a condition, but they're fairly similar in terms of they need to be relevant to the planning permission and necessary in kind and scale to the impacts of the development. I think here we've got a transport assessment. We know that the existing lawful use of the site, even though it hasn't been there or been used for some time, was as an educational facility, and that would have given rise to about 362 way movements a day. The proposal with the housing on it only gives rise to about 62 way units a day. So given there is a substantial reduction compared to the lawful baseline, I think it would just be impossible to try and argue that asking for anything from highways improvements would be related to those tests or fair to impose. I know you have concerns about it, but I just don't see how we could impose it given the evidence we have.
Can I come back on that, Chair, please? Yeah. No, I'm talking about when the construction is going on with all the construction vehicles and all, it has to have a plan because there are 4 schools around down there. And that time of the day, it's very difficult. People will be there for hours on that road. So there has to be some sort of plan for all the big vehicles going in and out. Thank you.
So if I come in on that one, we don't impose construction and vehicle movement plans on planning permissions because we don't consider they meet the legal test. We can't control the movement of vehicles over the public highway. And generally where people do try and impose them, to be honest, they're not worth the paper they're written on, and they set false. My brain's gone dead on the word I'm looking for. They give false reassurance to residents because the reality is they're impossible to actually enforce, monitor or manage or do anything about. The applicant and the drivers are perfectly entitled to drive on the public highway whenever they like. We can't detect breaches. We can't actually do anything about them. And even if we ask for them, they tend to include very vague assertions such as, well, use best endeavours, because the reality is when you order a concrete delivery and it drives a certain distance over the public highway, once traffic and things are taken into account, if you have something like a delivery time, the reality is the world takes over and it gets missed. So we don't impose them because they're just not practical to enforce, and they tend to cause a lot more issues in terms of us setting false expectations from residents that aren't delivered than they actually resolve. But that's the reason. So you'll see none of the recommendations we put forward ever have one on anymore, unless it's a very, very specific circumstance and site-specific consideration.
This could be a space.
I would say if I can, but I can certainly, I'm pretty sure, recall times of the past when there have been such conditions imposed on sites for access times, particularly. We can't stop them driving on the road, but you can certainly, we say don't deliver while the school runs on.
This is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying.
After the school run. So that is something we've done, isn't it, in the past?
This is what I'm suggesting, because it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, to be legally enforceable, you can only control things in the site. So you can put a condition on saying a vehicle can't enter the site before a certain time. But the reality is it doesn't work, because if the vehicle turns up before that time or after that time because it's travelled along the highway network and gets to the site, all the condition can do is prevent the vehicle entering the site. To be frank, once the vehicle's there, the last thing you want to do is for it to not go into the site where it's out of the way and out of everyone's way. So that's the reason they don't tend to work. If a vehicle turns up outside the hours, actually you do want it to go into the site so that it's not sitting on the public highway in everyone's way.
Maybe, but I don't know if you want to suggest a condition maybe to that, maybe restricted times.
Yeah, I think it's worth to look into it because it is quite important. It's a very, very big, massive road. So I think we should, if it be very good if the officers could look into that, because it is quite important. That road, there are accidents happening and there are lots of things. last couple of years ago, the 5 people died over there. And there are 4 or 5 schools going that way, everyone. So it's going to be a problem in the mornings and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. These are the only 2 times I would say we would look to consider if it's possible to do that, just to stop that. People going to work, school and everything, it is a big issue on the road.
I mean, whether it's enforceable or not, it'd be good neighbourly to follow the plan, would it not?
Good intentions.
I mean, if something's not going to meet the tests, it can't be imposed as a planning condition. We could put an informative on about considerate use of the road, etc. But if it's not going to meet the legal tests and we can't send an enforcement officer out and actually do anything about it, we really shouldn't be putting it on as a condition. But we could do an informative note to encourage the appropriate management of traffic. And in honesty, while I'm saying as a technicality, we can't do it as a planning condition because we can't enforce and we can't actually manage the expectations we might set. The reality is any developer will have a construction management plan in place, and most developers do want to keep their neighbours happy and not cause havoc, because actually that causes them problems, because if the neighbours are upset, they get the neighbours complaining to them as well, and they don't particularly want it. So I'd probably suggest that an informative note might be the way to try and address the issue.
Would that be acceptable? A informative note about avoiding school times. Would that be acceptable to be adding to Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Chair. Just on, I guess, a slightly related point on travel. I've obviously good to see that the cycle storage is on site. What there isn't, though, is any actual cycle travel plan. And I note in the supporting documents on the planning portal, there are some positive comments about the distances that other communities and things are cyclable away. Within 5k, you've got Sunninghill, Cheapside, Ascot, etc. And again, I guess disappointing to see there's nothing for that provided. And as Councillor Luxton says, those roads are quite busy, and I've cycled around them, and they are quite scary for anybody less confident. Firstly, I guess, is there anything we can do for that? I also note that there is a community infrastructure levy charge, section 11.1. Can't find anywhere how much it might be. So I guess, 2 questions. Is there anything we can do around cycling infrastructure? And then secondly, what's the amount of the SIL? Thank you.
I'll come in just because I think it's a similar answer to some of the other answers I've given, which is in relation to the cycle infrastructure and whether anything can be done off-site. Similar to the answer on highways, the previous use of the site would have been one that you would have expected to have generated significantly more trips to the site and significantly more demand for all modes of transport, to be honest. So given that the impacts are likely to be lower, it's not really something we could justify in terms of the SIL tests as asking for the developer to do anything off-site for that. In terms of the SIL contribution, I don't know a figure off the top of my head unless James does, but I will be honest, it will be a fairly negligible amount, I would imagine, because similar to vacant building credit, etc., SIL is based on floor space, and quite a significant amount of the floor space is being reused. So I don't have a figure, but it would be calculated in accordance with the SIL regulations, but having regard to any exemptions or deductions that they have.
So if we've got no other points to add, the proposition we had from Councillor Tizzy was to approve in accordance with offers of recommendations and the conditions listed, and with the informative note to avoid, if possible, site traffic around school traffic times in the local area. We were seconded by Councillor Devon Davis. If there's nobody else with anything else to add, we'll go to the name vote.
Can I just check, Councillor Davies, are you still happy to second with the inclusion of the informative? Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion to approve planning permission in line with officer recommendation as set out in the report and with the informative suggested by Councillor Luxton. This was proposed by Councillor Teasy and seconded by Councillor Davies. I'll now go to a named vote. Councillor Buckley.
For.
Councillor Carpenter.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Gosling.
For.
Councillor Knowles.
For.
Councillor Luxton.
For.
Councillor Teasy.
For.
Councillor Wilson.
For.
That's 8 votes for. The motion carries.
Thank you very much, panel, and that business is concluded there. We move now to application agenda item number 6, 24/00816, Horton Brook Quarry, Horton Road, Horton in Slough. May we have the presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is item 6 in relation to Horton Brook Quarry on Horton Road in Slough. The proposal is for the storage of materials ancillary to the principal use of the site as a recycling facility. Horton Brook Quarry comprises an area of land approximately 55 metres to the east of Horton Road. The quarry is entirely within Metropolitan Greenbelt, and the application site is approximately 12 hectares. Currently displayed on the screen, outlined in blue, is the wider site, and outlined in red is the application site boundary in which the storage of the ancillary materials will take place. The recent planning application history is currently shown on the screen and further outlined within section 6 of the accompanying committee report. There is an extensive planning history in which temporary planning permission was originally secured for the use of the land for waste and minerals extraction. However, the most recent planning application history currently outlined secured the continued use of the site as an inert waste recycling facility with a number of ancillary functions to support this use. As outlined within the application description, the proposed development is for the storage of materials ancillary to the principal use of the site for waste and recycling. The applicant has outlined a list of typical materials that will be stored, which include drainage hoses, drainage pipework, drainage couplers, geomembranes, drill attachments, water containers used for drainage pumping, steel stabilization metalworks, excavation drill bits, timber supports, piling rigs, and skips for storage only. As seen on screen, this is the typical materials that will be on the site. And some more images of the typical materials used on site. The applicant has submitted the following drawing to indicate the current site arrangements and the proposed storage materials on site, which will be situated in a small portion of the site outlined in red and would not interact with the existing uses. The key planning material considerations in this instance are the principle of development, greenbelt considerations, parking and highways impacts, and appropriate assessments. So to expand further on the material planning considerations and the assessment undertaken by officers to reach the recommendation, the Central and Eastern Berkshire Joint Minerals and Waste Plan has designated Horton Brook Quarry as a site suitable for mineral and waste operations in line with the officer recommendations for its continued use under the extant planning application. Policy DM14 of the Joint Minerals and Waste Plan additionally outlines that proposals for buildings and or structures ancillary to minerals processing or manufacturing, or for structures ancillary to existing minerals or waste operations, will be supported where they are appropriate and located within the development footprint of the existing site. The proposed development would not seek to alter the capacity of the application site insofar as it would not seek to extend the existing waste and mineral operations. The proposed development would seek to only store the materials on site as outlined in this presentation in conjunction with the principal use of the site and as such with accord with policy DM14. Officers note that a compliance condition, which is condition 3 within section 14 of the accompanying committee report, has been recommended to ensure that this would remain ancillary to the main use of the site. Moreover, should the main uses and operations in any eventuality cease to exist, then the storage of materials will also be required to do so. The site is also located within a metropolitan greenbelt, and as such, consideration must be given to greenbelt policies set out within the MPPF. The application site does not fall within the exemptions test set out within paragraph 154 and 155 of the MPPF, and as such, a case for very special circumstances must be considered. Officers have apportioned significant weight to the conclusions reached within the officer assessment for application 22-01492. In that case, the local planning authority found that the development was acceptable on balance, having regard to the fact that the very special circumstances case was met. Noting that the proposed development would be governed by a number of robust planning conditions, officers do not consider that a different conclusion would be justified in this instance, and accept that the proposed development would be a significantly less intense use and would be acceptable with respect to greenbelt considerations. The application has also been appraised by RBWM highways officers and no objection has been raised. The application site is governed by an existing planning condition which would restrict vehicular movement in and out of the site to a maximum of 200 per day. Officers concluded that the vehicular movements created by the ancillary functions would be de minimis, and conditions 4, 7, and 8 have also been reattached from the extant planning application to ensure that existing operations are not altered and would maintain the status quo in the interest of preserving highway safety. Under the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations Act of 2017, the local planning authority, acting in their capacity as the competent authority, are required to assess whether the proposed development, either alone or in combination, would give rise to likely significant impacts on a designated European protected site. The committee update report makes reference to a consultation response from Natural England, in which no objection has been raised in relation to the appropriate assessment and current submitted documentation. However, a construction environmental management plan has been recommended to ensure that there would be no harm to any protected species or any groundwater sources within the nearby SPA. This is further supported by the Environment Agency consultation response and recommended condition 4 of the accompanying committee report.
Thank you very much indeed. We have an applicant to speak, which is Mr. O'Reilly from Geoflex Aggregates. If you could come forward to the chair, the registered speaker chair. The microphone has a red button at the base. When you're ready to speak, if you press the red button and speak clearly into the microphone. You will have 3 minutes and Kim will give you a 1 minute warning before your time runs out. As soon as you're ready, sir.
I'm quite happy with that.
Does it work with it? You have to press a red button and keep it pressed. Leave it, take your finger away, it'll be okay.
Sorry, I'm quite happy with everything that's been said, and there's no objections, and the officer's recommendations. I'm quite happy to leave it as it is.
All right. If you press red again. If you come again, it's quite acceptable to put a written submission that we can read. So, yeah.
I do have a written statement. I wasn't sure if it was appropriate. I can hand it out now.
Very right. Okay. We can now carry on with the debate. Who's the
I
first
think
to speak?
Mr. O'Reilly
Sorry?
wants his written statement to be
we've got a
possibly
statement.
read.
Oh, sorry.
I'm happy to read that, if that makes life easier.
If you can distribute them, Mr. O'Reilly, we can take a moment to read them. And
Sorry, Chair, I would have to read that out on behalf of Mr. Riley.
okay.
I don't believe he can distribute his statement.
We ought to, for the point of clarity. It's not Mr. Riley's fault that he's unable to read it out.
I think
so.
Mr. O'Reilly was okay with everything that had gone on during the presentation, but I will read this out. We'll get as far as I can.
Well, you could read it out for us. Would
Yes.
that be acceptable?
Yes.
Would that be acceptable? Please do. And the 3-minute rule will still apply, of course, obviously.
It's very short, thank you. Thank you. So I'm reading out a statement on behalf of Mr. O'Reilly. Drawings have already been sent to the EA, who have withdrawn their previous objection. The construction of the hard standing required to enable permeable and impermeable areas of storage is located within the current working area of the permanent site that has been the main working area for the past 15 years. No additional plant and machinery to that already in regular use will be required for its construction. Perimeter bunds are already in place for dust suppression and noise mitigation. Additionally, an environmental management system is also in place on the site. Construction of the drainage will be carried out with existing plant and machinery and equipment in everyday use as already approved by the EA. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do apologise for Mr. Bradley. To add to my problems, I'm deaf as well, so we met somewhere in the middle there, so I do apologise. I can now open the debate to first person wishes to speak.
I just have an observation here that the operations and activities are going to take place between Monday to Friday, 7 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the evening. But on Saturday, they're going to start at 7 o'clock and finish at 1300, 1 o'clock. So my question is, would it be possible to start later on a Saturday? Because residents may not be so happy that it starts at 7. That's just an observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gosling. The extent planning and application under the 22 reference in section 6 of the report has a number of listed conditions that are already applicable to the site. So those have just simply been lifted from the original application and moved over to this. If we were to change those, it would be unreasonable given that it's an already existing operation on site.
Next, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. For me, this seems quite a straightforward sort of application. It's only for storage of materials, so there's no real development as such, as far as I can actually tell. I'm sort of encouraged by the comment that this planning application sort of would stop with the underlying planning application for the site. So it's not like if we approve this, then it gives something else extra life. So it just sort of sits underneath the existing application. So haven't really got any questions, I don't think, and kind of looks fairly straightforward.
Councillor Buckley.
Yes, Chair. As you know, we haven't received any statutory consultees' concerns. In fact, as the EA have already removed any concerns they had, there's huge, robust conditions applied to this application. So I'd be recommended to put forward a proposal to accept officers' recommendations on this one.
Thank you very much, Councillor Buckley. Anybody willing to second at this point? Councillor Gosling. And any more debate? Any more questions to ask? I think if everybody is happy, we'll proceed to the named vote. If we remind ourselves, I know you're trying to write as quick as you can there, but Councillor David Buckley proposed that we vote to accept the officer's recommendation to permit, and Councillor Gosling seconded that motion. Is that right? So name vote, please.
We have a motion proposed by Councillor Buckley and seconded by Councillor Gosling to grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 14 of the report, which is in line with officer recommendation. I can now go to a named vote. Councillor Buckley.
For.
Councillor Carpenter.
For.
Councillor Davies.
For.
Councillor Gosling.
For.
Councillor Knowles.
For.
Councillor Luxton.
For.
Councillor Teasey.
For.
Councillor Wilson.
For.
That's 8 votes for. That's unanimous. The motion carries.
Thank you very much, panel. Thank you very much, Mr. O'Reilly. We now move on to our next agenda item. I can find a bit of paper I've moved, which is agenda item 7, planning permission 24/2021 00864 for 1 Pinecote Drive, Sunningdale, Ascot, SO59BS. May we have the presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. This application is for a replacement dwelling at 1 Pinecote Drive, Sunningdale. The current application follows pre-application advice given in October of 2022, and then 3 subsequent planning applications, all proposing a replacement dwelling on the site. The first 2 planning applications were withdrawn following concerns raised by officers that the advice given at pre-app stage had not been followed, and then the third application refused as the advice given previously had still not been followed. This application seeks to address the previous reasons for refusal, which primarily related to poor design and a lack of information submitted around ecological matters. The application has been called in for determination by Councillor Luxton for consideration of matters relating to the character and appearance of the development. The site is located towards the entrance to Pinecote Drive. It's the first property on the left, as you can see on the site location plan here. The site shares a sideward boundary with the rear boundary of properties on Sunning Avenue. Pinecote Drive is a planned estate of medium to large size detached dwellings, which share some similar design characteristics. It is noted, however, that most properties have been altered or extended over their lifetime. From this aerial view, you can appreciate the townscape assessment characterisation as leafy residential suburbs. The site is indicated with the red pin marker. It is also noted that the site itself is subject to an area tree preservation order. Here follows a series of photographs showing the site and its surroundings in more detail. This photograph is taken from close to the entrance on Pinecote Drive, southward towards the application site, which is on the left at the end of the hedgerow. This photograph is taken from slightly further along Pinecote Drive, with the site now visible on the left. This photograph shows the existing dwelling from Pinecote Drive. It's a 2-storey dwelling with single-storey sideward projections and a forward projecting double garage. In its current form, the existing dwelling spans almost the entirety of the width of the plot, as you can see the close positioning to the hedgerow on either side. This shows that in a little bit more detail with the sideward boundary treatment visible. You can also see that there is a U-shaped driveway serving the site, which would be retained, and notice the fairly dense vegetation to each boundary. This photograph is taken from just beyond the application site, further southward along Pinecote Drive. As you can see from this photograph, properties on Pinecote Drive are generally set back in their plots and benefit from a wide variety of well-maintained vegetation and boundary treatments to the site frontages. These photos are taken from the same spot as the last, but back towards the application site, which is now on the right-hand side here. And again, examples of the boundary treatments and setbacks in the plots. This is photographs taken from the rear of the existing property. This plan is the proposed site plan. The dotted red line shows the footprint of the existing dwelling that is to be demolished. The proposed dwelling would be sited in an approximately similar position, with the existing projecting garage replicated. The proposed dwelling would be inset further from each sideward boundary than the existing, though it would project slightly further forward and in parts slightly further back, deeper into the plot. The inset from sideward boundaries is partly to address the issues that have arisen to previous applications relating to the impacts of the development of protected trees. The siting of the current scheme has been set outside of root protection areas and tree canopies, and a detailed arboricultural report has been submitted with the application. It is set out within that report that, subject to appropriate tree protection measures, which have also been provided, proposal would not have an adverse impact on those protected trees. Here you can see plans, floor plans and roof plan, which set out the proposed dwelling in a little bit more detail. Again, the red dotted lines indicate the footprint of the existing dwelling that would be demolished. The proposed dwelling, as you can see on the elevational drawing, would be 2.5 stories in height with room in roof accommodation. There is a single story sideward projection to one side of the dwelling, which incorporates a double garage, as previously mentioned. Here you can see the side elevations, each side elevation, and here you can see the proposed rear elevation. As you can see here, the room in roof accommodation would be served by 2 rearward dormers. There is also at first floor level a rearward balcony proposed. These elements, being the rear dormers and the first floor rear balcony, have been considered against the relevant sections in the Council's borough-wide design guide with respect to their impacts on the amenities of neighbouring occupiers. Given the orientation of the property and its immediate neighbours and the distances that we maintained from the balcony and the dormers to sideward boundaries, it is not considered that any significant harm would be caused to the amenities of those neighbouring occupiers in terms of loss of privacy through overlooking. And it is concluded that the amenities of neighbouring occupiers would be adequately preserved as a result of the proposals. In general design terms, we consider the proposal is in accordance with our policy and guidance. The siting, height, scale and bulk of the proposal are all considered to be acceptable. And while there will clearly be a change to the street scene, we do not consider that this would be to the detriment of the character of the area sufficient to warrant a reason for refusal of the application. A condition is recommended to secure details of the external materials to be used in the construction of the development. The other primary reason for refusal of the previous application related to ecological matters, and this has been addressed through the submission of an up-to-date ecological survey, which has been considered by the Council's ecologist and found to be acceptable, subject to several suggested conditions. The final matter relates to mandatory BNG requirements. As is required by Schedule 7A of the Town and Country Planning Act, the development is required to provide a 10% net gain in biodiversity. As set out in planning practice guidance, there are, however, exemptions to this mandatory requirement, which includes the delivery of self-build developments. During the course of the application, a self-build delivery statement has been provided. This sets out how the definition of self-build would be met, the definition being that set out in Section 1A of the Self-Build and Custom House Building Act 2015. This definition is also consistent with the Council's self-build guidance note. We are satisfied, on the basis of the information submitted, that the definition of self-build is met. Accordingly, we have amended the description of development to include reference to this being a self-build application and have also suggested a condition be applied to that effect. There is also in progress a legal agreement to secure the delivery of the self-build development, and on this basis we are satisfied that the development would be exempt from the mandatory BNG requirement. Subject to this, and a further agreement to secure carbon offset contributions and the suggested conditions, it is recommended that planning permission be granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Very concise stuff. This is new ground for us, as we'll find out as we discuss it. Can I ask Simon Gledhill to speak as a public representative, a resident of Pinecote Drive, and same rules, 3 minutes, press the button and speak when you're ready.
Good evening. I am one of the local residents who, along with SPAY and the Sunningdale Parish Council, have objected to this application, and I urge the panel to refuse it. The most important policy grounds for refusal are 1, poor design, 2, scale and bulk, and 3, potential impact on trees and nature. According to the Borough Design Guide, one of the 4 strategic aims of the council is to create and preserve a sense of place. Pinecote Drive has a strong sense of place. It consists of dwellings from a family of styles used by Eden Developments, all built from London stock bricks and Roman-style roof tiles. The townscape is leafy residential suburbs. Dwellings are set in a spacious sylvan environment, and give a feeling of fitting in with nature rather than dominating it. In the past, the council has actively encouraged a natural environment and consistency of style within the road be preserved. There have been many extensions, but consistency of style, materials, and overall character of the road has been maintained. The house proposed, in complete contrast to the house currently on site, would stand out as being different and not fitting. Elevation showed is very clearly not from the family of styles to which the other houses belong. It appears also much darker and dominating, and would be the only house in the road to have a flat crown roof rather than hip or ridge and gable. It is a poor design and will negatively impact the character of the cul-de-sac. And more, this would be particularly relevant because of the second reason for refusal. The house is of a different scale and bulk to other houses in Pinecote, particularly nearby houses. The crown roof is to enable an increase in floor area of 76%. The description suggests an increase only from 4 to 5 bedrooms, but these bedrooms are much larger, mostly with en-suites, and included a dressing room, which could be a bedroom. Flat roof height would be 16% higher. This would lead the house to stand out for its scale and bulk, further emphasising its poor design. And despite protection, such an increase will likely bring desire for more natural light and pressure on trees in future, damaging the natural environment and biodiversity. Pinecote Drive has a valued character and sense of place. I wish to preserve it and would like to urge the developer to tastefully refurbish the current house, not wastefully demolish it. Once current rental tenants have left, I urge the panel to refuse this damaging application, which would set a bad precedent. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Gledhill. We are now ready to proceed. I did mention new ground. This is the first self-build application, isn't it? Which has actually come before under the current regulation, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, we've probably had many applications before that have been self-builds, but it's the first one before committee since the biodiversity net gain came in and the need to ensure it's self-build and secure that.
So it's a slightly different balance, isn't it, for information on the planning balance, which is reflected in the report. And something we'll explore now, no doubt, as we discuss it. Who's the first to open the debate? Can I ask you if you could turn the microphone off there, or else it might start feeding back later. Anybody to add anything? Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. My main question is, a lot of the comments seem to be about the bricks that are being used, and is the fact it's going to look different to the rest of the houses in the street. And I know you said in your presentation I can't see your name. That it wasn't an issue, but obviously it is an issue to the local residents and to some of the other people that have commented. Is there not a recommendation to use, the London stock bricks that are being used in the current houses? Would that at least alleviate some of the concerns from the local residents? Because it's going to stand out, isn't it, if it's going to look completely different to all of the other houses that are built with those bricks? Is that not something we could, consider at least? Thank you.
Yes, so the details pertaining to the external materials that would be used in development are relatively light in the submission. We have suggested a condition be applied that requires details of all external materials to be agreed prior to the commencement of development. That would include details of brickwork, roof tiling, fenestration, and so on.
Yes, Councillor Carpenter.
Okay, so that's fine if we ask for more details, but if we're approving it tonight, then how, or if we do approve it tonight, for example, can we approve it on the condition that they do use the same materials, so it wouldn't stand out, like an odd one out in the street?
I mean, if I can, we wouldn't tend to try and specify precise materials, because there's all kinds of problems with brick supply, and every brick looks slightly different. But we put on the standard condition if members were minded that there was a particular aspect of the materials that that should be included, that condition could be amended. So say if members were minded that to be acceptable, it should be a buff yellow brick of similar appearance, that is something open to the panel tonight to ask for that condition to be made more specific. I mean, there are things I would say, bricks and roof tiles are probably the most obvious and easy ones to control. I think that there are aspects that you wouldn't look to go into, that there are things where this design is slightly different from others on the street, and that's part of the design. For example, I don't think it would actually look right if you tried to ensure that they had the same lead panelling on the windows as the other houses. It would just look somewhat odd with the design that's there. So it's something that's open to the panel. I'll leave it to members to decide what they think is the most appropriate way forward.
Thank you very much. I mean, I've noticed with a lot of the objections that I've seen that a lot about the size and the scale, but I've noticed there's a lot of narrative in there about the previous plans were much bigger in scale. Is there a chance some of the consultation may have crossed the amended plans and maybe be related to the original much larger plans? And we can't see the larger plans, but it said they were much larger in scale.
So the scheme that's before us tonight is the original scheme that was submitted with the application. There haven't been any amendments in terms of design through this application. There have, however, been a scheme presented under a pre-app and then 3 subsequent planning applications which have been concluded, which had different and larger and more substantial developments, which was considered harmful. I mean, for example, one element in the scheme that's before us that has been, a key aspect of the current scheme that wasn't represented in the previous iterations were that with some slight changes, there was essentially a second story above the garage that has now been deleted. So to previous iterations of the scheme, up at 2-story level, the dwelling extended at much greater width. The element that was above the garage has now been deleted. So that doesn't form part of these proposals. But yes, the scheme that is before us is the scheme that was submitted as part of this application and hasn't been amended under the course of this application.
So would it be what was consulted on? I just sort of want to check that as a parent. Councillor Buckley?
Yes, I've got a couple of points for officers. Taking into considerations of the residents and the other properties in the street, have we got any guidance in regards to any extensions or other developments in that street in regards to extra size? And I wonder if we've got anything else we can look at, or are you aware of any other developments or extended properties in the street of this size?
So certainly, I think concerns have been raised about this being the first replacement dwelling that's been proposed along Pinecote Drive, and that is correct. There have been no prior replacement dwellings along the street. There have, however, been significant number of planning permissions granted for extensions and alterations of the original dwellings. I briefly looked through the public portal this afternoon and noted of the 19 dwellings along Pinecote Drive, 14 of them have had planning permissions for extension or alteration of some kind. On my site visit, obviously looking at the dwellings in the vicinity of the site, many of those planning permissions have been built out. There are examples along Pinecote Drive of very significantly extended dwellings that I can't make a direct numerical comparison, but to my eye would be larger in scale in their extended forms than this dwelling as proposed. It's certainly the case that there are substantial extensions to dwellings along Pinecote Drive, and to my mind, the scale of the scheme that's presented would not be significantly greater than those that are currently along Pinecote Drive.
Second.
Sorry to follow on from that. Obviously, we see this in other parishes and other areas around the borough, whereby local communities, parishes, etc., bring in neighbourhood plans and design guides, which help support some of the concerns of residents in that local area. Is there any adopted neighbourhood plan or design guide for this area that would support the residents' concerns in any way, or would they be supported and officers take into consideration?
Yes. Sorry, yes, so there is an up-to-date neighbourhood plan that covers the site. Bear with me a second. So yes, there are plans within Ascot, Sunningdale, Sunninghill and Sunningdale neighbourhood plan relating to design, respecting the townscape, talking about density, footprint, separation, scale and bulk, and encouraging good quality design, which are referenced in the reports. As I mentioned in my presentation, it's officers' opinion that the development that has been submitted is of a scale and bulk, design, siting, height that is acceptable when considered against local policy and guidance, that being the neighbourhood plan, the local plan, and then more detailed guidance in the borough-wide design guide. And it is considered by officers that the proposed development does not deviate from that guidance.
Councillor Luxton, are you still?
Yes, I am, but I lost my page. I have just want to bring officers into to consider 10. Oh, sorry, I've lost my page. Just officers' attention about conditions for 10.36 and 10.35, I think. One is about this: if the property is being sold before 3 years, then we are going to implement safe whatever the safe. I'll have to go back onto my page. I've lost it. But I think you know the two paragraphs on 10.35 and 10.36. The conditions on that.
It's effectively addressing. Sorry.
35, yeah, I found it. Yeah, that's
10.35 and 10.36.
Yeah.
So that they're effectively addressing any exemptions from obligations that the applicant is obtaining through self-build. So if you certify that you're self-building, you become exempt from, for example, biodiversity net gain and community infrastructure contributions, but you are required to actually go and live in the property and live in it for a period of time. So this would be picked up by a legal agreement. And then obviously if the applicant did never move into the property as they've said they would, or for whatever reason, or they moved in and moved out in less than the time period, then we would expect the contributions to be forthcoming.
So who would, just going back to that, who would actually monitor that, or do we, when we are giving that permission legally, this is going to be included in that legal document, or are we talking about the future? Because it should be.
It would be legal agreement that we're doing with the application, so it would be included within a legal agreement. Obviously, we're not going to have someone standing on site to check if the applicant moves in or moves out, but there are various trigger points, for example, in a sale process or a land sale process, which would involve conveyancing, and you would expect it to get flagged up through one of those. So it would be brought to our attention, or the attention of a prospective purchaser, that there were likely to be substantial obligations, so that would normally get picked up through that.
That is quite an important one, I think, especially it is since it's self-build. We should really emphasize on that quite a bit, if those 2 points. Thank you very much.
I think that's a key thing, isn't it? Is how you enforce that point, and how do you know it's really self-built? Because you have to take somebody's declaration, and they sign a legal declaration to that effect. So they're putting themselves in jeopardy if they decide to go against that.
But I'm just
it's a thing, isn't it? You know, it's certainly it's a whole new ballpark, isn't it? Really, for enforcement, it's how you do it. Councillor Buckley.
I'm coming back on Councillor Luxton's point now. Apologies for my croaky voice. The residents have already noted this property is rented out currently. in regards to self-builds, what's stopping this being built? And because of the 3-year restriction, stopping them renting it out and then selling it off, because we're developing this format with self-builds, I just want to understand how we're going to manage these things going forward.
But I think the inference is that the individual who's registered for self-building moves into the property, not rents it out to third party, but they occupy. Would that be right?
Yes, that's correct. So as part of the submission, so there's a self-build delivery statement that's been provided, which has a named individual. There's a subsequent signed declaration from that named individual that they are the person that is to be occupying, and they have had the input into the design to meet the definition of self-build. So it is them who would be tied into the legal agreement for the 3-year period following completion.
Yeah, and you'd also, for example, you would expect the person who is the self-builder to be the person registered to pay council tax and to be registered on the electoral roll. So there are various sources of information available to the wider council which would enable you to check up and detect if something wasn't right.
Yeah, can I come back on that, please?
Yes, certainly,
Yeah.
Councillor Lexner.
Thank you. We as councillors of the area, we do get the address of everybody, those daily regular ones, so we can actually know that if somebody could be sublet to somebody else and all, I suppose, then we could also. But I think it's quite important because we don't want to set a precedence for the others to do a self-build and not follow it. So this is very important that we do legally emphasize on this to make sure it doesn't happen. There are lots of people who may do these things.
There's a number of legal agreements in place. So strict-wise, if somebody registers there as a voter and lives somewhere else, they commit an offence anyway, because that's not legally allowed either. So there's lots of things people can get caught out with. I would hope, we would all hope it's in the best nature of individuals that they follow the rules. But I think we could all be slightly sceptical sometimes, but we have to take the planning application as it's presented and the facts that are therein. Do we have Councillor Tizzy?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, I must admit, looking at some of the objections, I accept that some of them may have been raised before the plans were amended and may relate to yes. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, fine. I'm therefore quite confused in terms, because I'm just how vociferous some of these objections are. But I do understand this is a beautiful, beautiful road, and I guess this is possibly a close community in that road. And so, just listening to the resident who spoke earlier, I think that the materials might be a reasonable point, and I would actually, I don't know, this is something propose that should we be minded to accept this application, that with regards to condition 3, which is as in at 14.3, where we talk about the materials to be used, and that we need to don't commence until we've seen the first we've submitted to and approved in writing, that that we find particular wording that suggests that maybe the bricks should be what was it, of sort of roughly what's it, buff design or something, or buff
sympathetic.
Sympathetic. The only thing I will note to that is I think that even within that, let's be honest, I think that we should delegate, or rather allow officers to use their reasonable judgment on this, because actually when looking at Google Maps, looking at the houses that are around, they are all broadly buff-ish, but there's ranging from fairly white to fairly orange, as it were. It's not a uniform. It is definitely not uniform, and certainly I can understand if this were to be black, for example, that would not be in keeping with the aesthetic of the area. And I completely think, oh no, goodness me. But if it's broadly the same, broadly similar, that to me sounds right. So that's materials though. With regard to all the other things, I'm just not convinced by the objections. I'm sorry. I'm just the bulk. I'm looking at some of the other houses, and it does not look too dissimilar. The proposal does not look too dissimilar to what is already there with some other houses on that street. The design, I think the gentleman mentioned the flat roof, but all I see, and it'd be good if officers could clarify, it is mostly pitched. There is a flat area on top where there are proposed photovoltaic, PV solar panels. That's the one. Sightings, hail, sky. I mean, I just don't see I just don't see what is horribly wrong about this. I mean, when I look at that, yes, it's a self-build. I just, but it does appear roughly in keeping, so long as I completely agree with read materials though, because if it is dark, if it's black, that I think, you know, that's not acceptable. I just wonder if the officers could just clarify about the materials, about, you know, can we find some sort of wording that, or are you expecting me to say the wording?
I can probably help, because there's a fairly standard phraseology that's used, for example, in standard conditions in the GDPO, which is generally use it for extensions, etc., that is a similar appearance to materials of a similar appearance to those used in the construction of the existing house. If we simply change construction of the existing house and said of a similar appearance to used on other dwellings within the road, I think that would adequately cover the point.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, something like that.
There's something we can add. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with the point around scale. That I don't agree with the representations from other residents. There are bigger houses on the street looking around on Google Maps. So the scale piece I don't agree with. Agree with Councillor Teasey in terms of the materials and the brick. So I would support that that comment around looking similar. The road, there is some similarity on the road. There is some differences. And I guess the one thing that strikes me with the design is actually the windows. I know there was a reference to LED just now, but if I look, and apologies for using Google Maps, but looking up and down the road, there, as I say, there's some slight variation in the design, but there is a lot of consistency, and the materials is the main, the materials in the overall design, but also the windows. The windows, as far as I can see, are pretty much the same with the small, like the kind of the eighths division, whereas on the design on the screen, the windows are very clearly different. So I wonder, firstly, is that design on the screen correct? And secondly, what would, I don't know, that feels, is there anything we can either put a condition on, or how significant is that? Because that feels like that would look different from the street scene perspective.
Up again.
I mean, again, it's a matter of material and specification, so it is something that could be addressed by condition if members felt particularly strongly that the details of the fenestration should also be of similar appearance, and then we could also include details of the fenestration in the materials condition and cover that off.
That sounds good.
Councillor Buckley.
Yes, Chair. It's just basically we've covered lots of ground here. My proposal is to agree officers' recommendations, subject to the two conditions that have been raised, that the materials are similar appearance to other dwellings, as recommended by officers. And I would suggest the officers to guide, but windows in similar appearance and size to other dwellings as well.
As an addition to condition 3, that's already
Yes.
in the condition. Yeah. We have a seconder?
Oh.
Councillor Luxton. So we have the proposal and a seconder, and if nobody else has anything to add to the debate, we can move to a name vote, I believe.
I might just need some clarification on the wording of the motion, but please bear with me and I'll do that soonest. I'll give it a go. So we have a motion proposed by Councillor Buckley and seconded by Councillor Luxton to grant planning permission on the satisfactory completion of an undertaking to secure carbon offset contributions and the self-build status of the development as set out in section 10 of the report and with the conditions listed in section 14 of the report. We will also now amend condition 3 to include details of fenestration and states that the materials shall be of similar appearance to those used on other properties within the road. Does that cover everything?
We spoke about brickwork and other bricks to be a similar character.
Okay.
Fenestrations, windows.
Okay. Would you like me to reread it, or can we just agree that
we have to make sure it is
okay.
correct. So,
Okay.
So fenestration similar character and bricks to be of a similar character to the existing properties on the street. I think that's what you said, wasn't it?
Yes, it might just be useful to clarify in the debate when we talk just for officers' purposes, because we'll have to deal with this when we get a discharge of condition. And when we're talking about the aspects of the fenestration that members are asking to be similar, are we talking about the window panes and the leading on them, or are we talking about the header details above them? I think it would be useful for officers to know.
For me, looking at it, it's basically that the windows themselves look similar to the others. So per the drawing there, I can kind of see what looks like possibly black frames and basically 2 panels for each of the windows. So it would effectively be to have white frames and like the sort of the 4 or 8 panel style. Yeah, well, yeah, because the other, looking at the street, they are all like that. The brick design immediately above the windows, that's probably too fine a detail for me. That is marginally different, but as I say, there's variations across the street, but the big image of that would be the black to the white and the quarter panels.
It's more the appearance.
Yes.
So the appearance.
The appearance is similar. Do officers work with that? Sorry,
it's fine that the wording of the motion being proposed covers it. I just felt that it would be useful both for the residents who might be listening or watching, and also for the officers when we come to discharge the condition, to have a slightly more clarity behind the scenes on it.
Can I just chair? Okay. Sorry, Jim.
Yes, just on that point. Thank you, Chair. I mean, we're looking at, I think we're both looking at Google Maps and looking up and down the street on that. As Councillor Wilson has said, there is actually a lot of variation in terms of the fenestration on the street. If we just literally just look opposite the proposed house, there's one immediately opposite which has a white frame, but quite a thick frame. But then they have that sort of the thin quartering, which is aligns to the rest of the street. The one next door has also a white frame, but it's a thinner white frame, and they all seem to be white. They all seem to have this sort of quartering. They are different, however, in terms. I mean, like there's a bay window There's one's got lead on the top, but others got brick on top. But so there is variation, but they all do seem to be broadly white with the quartering, if that makes sense, if that helps officers.
But I think then that phrase appearance is a better use of language rather than similar. So, just that then be a bit too subjective, I think. So if we're happy with that the fenestration is similar in appearance to the rest of the properties, and the bricks used are similar to existing buildings on the street.
Okay, I'll try again.
Okay.
We have a motion proposed by Councillor Buckley and seconded by Councillor Luxton to, in line with officer recommendation, grant planning permission on the satisfactory completion of an undertaking to secure carbon offset contributions and the self-build status of the development as set out in section 10 of the report, and with the conditions listed in section 14 of the report, with condition 3 being amended to confirm that materials for the brickwork and fenestration to be of similar appearance and character to other properties on Pinecote Drive.
Okay.
Can I go to a named vote?
I think we're all good for the named vote.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Or.
Councillor Carpenter.
Or.
Councillor Davies.
Or.
Councillor Gosling.
Abstain.
Councillor Knowles.
Or.
Councillor Luxton.
Or.
Councillor Teasy.
Or.
Councillor Wilson.
Or.
That's 7 for 1 abstention. The motion carries.
Thank you very much, panel. We now move on to the final agenda item, which is planning appeals received and the planning decision report, which is, of course, attended at the back of it. Has anybody any points from that before we note the contents? Councillor TC.
Just only a quick note that it's if I've read this right, it's good to note that of the planning appeals received this month, they've all been dismissed, and so that's good to see from an officer perspective.
You've raised exactly the point that I was going to raise, just because I thought I should mention it to give the officers credit, which is that we have actually had a clean sheet in this period and we've won all of them. So that's great.
That being self-congratulatory, I think that it means our process at ISAD, including with panel, works, doesn't it?
I mean, obviously, panel and officer decisions have both been sound for the period.
Yeah. But no, it shows the process works. There being no other business, I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Chair.